Welcome to VO Life, presented by Gravy for the Brain Oceania, the interview segment where I talk to people in the voiceover industry who are agents or they're producers or they're voiceover artists and they're tops of their field so that you can hopefully benefit from some of the advice they have to give. And today on the podcast, I'm very pleased to present my good friend and fellow Gravy for the Brain territory controller, Graeme Spicer from Canada. Hello, how are you?
Everybody. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very, very good to chat to you. As I was just saying before, like we've met briefly sort of in Zoom meetings and things, and I had a sense that we were sort of, voiceover kindred spirits. And so I wanted to explore that and find out more about your history. I'm fascinated that you used to be in sort of advertising and you've really kind of like been around the industry for a long time. So I'm keen to sort of explore some of the aspects of the voiceover industry which some people might not realize exist. So,
the way you say I've been, you've been around the industry a long time. That doesn't sound so good.
Just reading a website. So you're based in Canada. Whereabouts in Canada are you?
I just moved during the COVID. We bought a little house in a community about an hour outside of Toronto. I had been in Toronto for like 30 years. So I'm just outside of Toronto now in a little city called Hamilton.
Oh, nice. So we're both part of the exodus from the cities. The voiceovers saying, I don't need to be in a big city anymore. I can go and do it anywhere in the world.
I can't remember. Actually, that's not true. I can remember. Since last March, when the entire world shut down, I have been in a recording studio other than my own once. That's it. I mean, there's no... Finally, what we already all knew is that, we could do our job just as well or better remotely than we could actually in studio. Finally, all of the producers are starting to figure out, and it makes their lives easier too. So.
Absolutely. I've been saying for a long time to local producers here in New Zealand that, I don't need to fly down and be in the session with you. It's nice to sort of, shake hands and everything, but everyone's learnt during COVID that that's not necessarily true. You can have just as fruitful a business relationship, via Zoom and using, Source Connect and these voiceover tools. And there's really no compromises, eh?
Yeah. I mean, Source Connect sounds as good as if I was actually in the studio with them. The technology is flawless. And yeah, I mean, it's nice to get FaceTime in with these people on occasion because I think that helps build relationships. I think that the whole idea of having, FaceTime is different now than it was pre-COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I almost think you get a better performance with someone who's comfortable in their own home studio over Source Connect than you do for someone who's been sitting in traffic for 2 hours, have had 2 coffees, and have just met all these new advertising people. I love the fact that there is this kind of curtain of privacy almost that Source Connect gives you, because you can be in your pajamas. Literally, it's that dream that we talked about 10 years ago about working on the internet, how you can be in a big business meeting. I've been doing commercials with 10 corporate executives from some big car company in the room in LA, and I'm sat here in my little studio in the middle of nowhere in my pajamas, and no one's any the wiser.
Yeah, well, I suppose in your case that is literally true because of the time zone difference. When it's morning in LA, it's a bizarre time of the day for you. So
it is. It's very early. Yeah, I may or may not be wearing pajama trousers now. So speaking of sort of advertising and ad man, you used to be an ad man, right?
I did. I spent the first kind of 25 years of my career working on the other side of the glass. I worked at various advertising agencies, and then I went client side and worked as a director of marketing on the client side for, several years before I kind of decided I didn't want to work for the man anymore. And, voiceover was giving me a creative outlet that I didn't have working in the corporate world. But yeah, I worked for 25 years in the advertising business, and all of the stories you've heard from Mad Men, and they're all true. They're all true.
I'm surprised you would survive the alcohol poisoning or the smoking.
Thankfully, I hit the industry just at the very tail end of the Mad Men era. So I did some drinking at the onset of my career, but certainly not as much as Don Draper and the rest of the Mad Men crew seem to have done.
Yeah. And I imagine that would form a really good foundation, and it would really inform the way you market yourself and perform as a voiceover, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I probably could use it more effectively from a marketing standpoint. I don't really, but I do think that it helps me understand more quickly the essence of what the writer was trying to get across when they wrote that particular radio spot or that particular television spot, because I understand the business behind where he ended up with the script. So I do think it helps inform my reads. And now I'm going to start using it more effectively from a marketing standpoint too, after you pushed me into it, Toby.
Absolutely. Yeah, because I mean, I was in radio, and then I was in I was an engineer in a recording studio before that. So I feel like that really was useful in terms of as if you watch the process in action with a voiceover artist in the studio, you can learn so much. Which is why I think our Gravy for the Brain script read-throughs, where everyone's having a go and watching and hearing the feedback, is so useful, because if you've done that 1,000 times, you get so much better just from watching someone be produced. So I've definitely felt that way as an engineer, that I've seen it done so many times that it's easier for me to transition to doing it myself.
I have often thought that in workshop or group read situations, that I've always learned more observing other people read than when I'm actually reading myself, because I'm nervous and I'm not really fully aware of what's happening, versus when I'm listening to somebody else and I'm hearing the direction that they're being given. It's easier for me to internalize that. Hopefully our students at Gravy for the Brain find the same thing.
Yeah, I'd say, and I think there would be a really good sort of brain psychology reason for that, and that when you do have because it is nervous getting up in people and reading, when you're sort of not used to it, and when the adrenaline kicks in and your fight or flight kicks in, your frontal cortex, the part that makes decisions and rationalizes things, shuts down. So you're kind of just acting on instinct and like a something, deer in the headlights. Whereas I think when you're standing back and you can rationalize everything and hear the feedback and hear they're not applying the feedback or whatever, it's a lot easier to sort of judge from the sidelines. So, yeah.
Which is another reason probably why we can deliver as good or better performances in our own home studios remotely than we can actually in front of 10 people behind the glass all staring at us as we're trying to perform the piece of copy that's been given to us.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. Because once you spent so much time in your own space, especially like doing auditions in front of your computer, it kind of feels like another audition sometimes, just with direction instead. So it really aids that. So let's do a quick tour of where you've been in the industry in terms of voiceovers, because sort of in preparing for this, I see that you were a big part of sort of Edge Studio and for a while sort of voiceovers.com before coming to Gravy for the Brain. So what organizations have you been involved with throughout your voiceover career? And just tell us a little bit about that experience.
Well, I've been a member of World Voices, WOVO, since it started, and I spent a period of time on the board at WOVO. I was the managing director of Edge Studio. Actually, Edge Studio was a great role for me because I was able to take, the 25 years of business experience that I had and apply it to this business that I love of voiceover. I mean, it was a good scenario. But it was hard to do that job living in Toronto and being based out of New York. If for no other reason, from an immigration standpoint, it was a little dicey. So,
right.
But I was the managing director of Edge Studio for 4 years, and I spent a brief period of time at voiceovers.com that I'm not going to spend much more time on, other than to say that I was there.
Yes, fair enough. Yeah.
They're going through a lot of transition there right now. They've recently been purchased by a venture capital company out of Canada, actually, called Tiny Capital. And I think they're doing some retrenching at voiceovers.com.
What is it with Canada and voiceover services? Voices.com is based in Canada, and as you said, there's a lot of investment. It seems like it's quite sort of especially from the money side of things, Canadians believe in it more than Americans do. I mean, Voice 123, the two biggest sites, are based outside of America, which surprises me.
I mean, Voice 123 would like you to think that they're based out of San Francisco, but in reality, they're based out of Colombia.
Yeah.
the president, Rolf, actually sits in Holland, I believe. So,
And they've
yeah,
got a completely the what's it called, the distributed workforce, don't they? They don't have any offices, so it's kind of a new
as
business.
far as I'm aware, like I think they used to have an office in Colombia that they've disbanded, and everyone works remotely now. Well, welcome to 2021, the way of the world, where I think companies are realizing that all of those expenses that they've been paying on, expensive rent for offices and stuff, a lot of it isn't necessary.
I'd be very worried if I was a commercial building owner in a big city at the moment.
Absolutely.
So tell us about some of your voiceover work, like your biggest sort of gig to date, some work you're most proud of. What would you say?
It's funny. When I first got into voiceover, I thought I was going to be because I had spent a little bit of time in radio back when I was in high school, and I thought I was going to be the big monster truck guy. And as it turns out, that's just not me. That's not my voice. That's not my personality. As you can probably hear, there's a bit of a rasp in my voice. I do a lot of like truck stuff and beer, that kind of stuff. I was the voice of a brand of beer here in Canada called Laker Beer for several years. So, I'll occasionally get stopped in the supermarket or wherever where someone has heard my voice and do I know your voice? Are you the Laker guy? Yeah, I'm the Laker.
Stopping you in the beer aisle and going.
And that's been a couple of years since that ran. Actually, Laker hasn't been advertising on radio so much in the last couple of years. So
it shows the power of voice as a part of a marketing strategy, doesn't it? And I feel like that's a lesson that like the millennial management coming through advertising now doesn't appreciate as much as their predecessors, perhaps, because I know in New Zealand here, the biggest brands used to have like one voice that was just the voice of their brand, and that was it. Like, and as soon as they spoke, it was like, oh, you're the telecom guy. But since then, it's like every campaign they cast for, and it's different every time, which is kind of confusing.
And that's really been a trend in the U.S. as well. When we're looking at some of the biggest advertisers are insurance companies. So let's take Geico as an example, where Geico's famous for the Geico gecko.
The little British lizard with a funny little voice.
Exactly. that kind of Cockney East London, which is just adorable. It's a great campaign.
Yeah, it was.
But they also are running concurrently, other campaigns as well, always using humor, but they're not sinking all of their money and all of their GRPs into the one, Geico Gecko campaign.
What's a GRP out of interest?
Oh, gross rating point. It's a measure of television advertising.
Ah, right. Interesting. Cool. I always like to learn new acronyms. So what's a normal voiceover day for you? Is there such a thing as a normal voiceover day?
Not really, which is, I think, is one of the reasons why I love voiceover so much, is I'm a very early riser.
Yeah, I think I got a message from you, which is about sort of 2:30 a.m. your time.
Quite
last
possibly.
Night. Yeah.
Quite possibly. I don't sleep very well. And I'm usually up by, 4:45 or 5 o'clock local time. So I find my most productive time is in those first few hours. And it's not doing voiceover so much because my voice is, it takes an hour or two to kind of warm up before I'm really ready to voice anything. But I find those first couple hours when it comes to doing administrative stuff, doing my invoicing and trying to chase down people that owe me money, things like that, that's good time for that. And then I kind of, dive into whatever has accumulated in my inbox since the previous evening. I work with 3 or 4 companies that do a lot of IVR and phone prompts, and a lot of that stuff, because it's European based, the companies are European based, rolls in overnight my time. So when I arrive in the morning, there's usually some stuff there that needs to be done for that. I'll take a look and see what's new on some of the online casting sites that I'm a part of, and if there's anything particularly juicy, I'll throw in my auditions for that. And then I kind of start into whatever kind of larger projects might be on my plate at that particular moment, whether it's an e-learning project or or something like that.
Fair enough. Yeah. I mean, I'm the same in terms of like I like that no two days are the same, and that you're not quite sure what's going to arrive in your inbox that you'll have to deal with the next day. And sometimes it's a fantastic surprise. It's like, oh, you're the new voice of this Google department or something, and it's like, yay. And other days, the quiet days at the moment, are also great too for me, because I'm putting as I was saying before, I'm putting the finishing touches to my house, and so any time I can spend on the building site, like finishing off that, is also great. So it's nice to have a balance of those two. And I feel like voiceover could probably be the best job in the world for work-life balance, I reckon.
Well, certainly. It's not like we sit at a desk and we churn away on spreadsheets for 8 hours a day. It is that, I'm not saying that our business is an easy one, because it's not. And it takes a lot of work to be successful at it. But it's one of those things where it's either feast or famine, is that, we can do one session and get paid $5,000 for it. And then there's nothing for the next 2 days or 3 days, something like that. Yeah. So, it gives us that flexibility. Like before I jumped on with you here now, I was in my bathroom grinding out some tiles so that I could make my furnace register fit in the in where we just freshly had tiled in the bathroom floor. So,
I'm sorry to take you away from your grinding. Very good. Right. So as I was saying before as well, and like regular listeners will know, I kind of split voiceover into three sort of parts, which are equally important. The craft of voiceover, how you actually perform voice health, all that kind of stuff. The technology of voiceover, how you record yourself, and then the business, how you market yourself, find work, and then charge money for that work. So I just want to take one of those, each of those sort of areas, and just ask you a few questions around your sort of approach, if that's all right.
Sure.
Firstly, so you're from Canada, and I have been asked a little bit recently, because I'm sort of a multi-accentist. I do a bunch of different stuff in different accents, and I've been asked to do a Canadian accent, and it's one of the accents I'm least familiar with, and it annoys me. So I was kind of like going to get like a short little masterclass on what makes the Canadian accent different from the American accent. Like, what are the key differences that perk your ears up when you hear, oh, that's not a Canadian accent?
We tend to keep our mouth more closed, like, the infamous out, where, Americans, it's actually out. It's three different sounds in there, and your mouth actually opens quite wide as you say it, versus Canadians where it's just out. And it's our mouth is more closed. But it's really subtle, the difference between a Canadian and an American accent. Usually when the Americans are asking for a Canadian accent because they're doing work for a Canadian client, all they mean is they don't want someone that sounds like Colonel Sanders or or something like that, where no obvious regional accent. If there's an accent that's kind of closest to how we speak in Canada, it's probably like Chicago, Wisconsin, like that kind of Illinois, Wisconsin, that kind of upper Midwest.
Yeah, it's a kind of a spectrum that sort of fades into Canada, isn't it? Like you lose those sort of the brashness, and it kind of it does get more focused.
Listen, if I don't know if you're a fan of old movies, but Fargo, the movie Fargo.
Absolutely, yeah. Minnesota.
Frances McDormand speaks with that.
It's brilliant. Yeah, it's beautiful.
And that is sort of a Canadian-ish accent.
And I'm sure, like, when you say a Canadian accent, it's about like the New Zealand accent. There isn't one New Zealand accent. There's all kinds of, socioeconomic factors, location differences, etc. So I imagine there's a bit of a range, and you can tell where someone's from.
Absolutely. There's like someone from the west of Canada tends to sound like someone from middle of Canada. But if you go to the east coast of Canada, like Newfoundland, Newfoundland is they're famous for having a very strongly accented delivery, which is really quite lovely and adorable. But it is a specialized thing that would be it's hard to find good voice actors from Newfoundland, because most of them grew up with such a strong regional accent that if you're not doing radio commercials for Newfoundland, it's pretty tough to sell.
Exactly, yeah. It's probably quite similar, I imagine. Like America, I feel like America and Canada and New Zealand and Australia are quite similar in terms of like we've got a big neighbor who's kind of a bit louder and has a bit more sort of size in the world, and we're kind of like the quiet cousin, if you like. That we're like, no one can tell our accents apart, but we can tell our accents apart a lot. The Australian versus New Zealand accent, it's very subtle, but for Kiwis and Australians, it's like blinding headlight differences. So yeah,
there probably isn't as much of a difference between Canadians and Americans.
Right.
I will often be pegged as a Canadian when I am just speaking to someone like I'm speaking to you now. But when I'm in a voiceover booth, I can put on a fairly neutral accent, and no one, like I've done a lot, like I'm the national voice for Lennox home heating and air conditioning products in America. I've done a national campaign there that's running right now, and no one's ever gotten back to the client and said, "You got a Canadian for that." Just didn't work. It doesn't work that way.
I feel like Americans are kind of flexible. Like there is this whole standard American thing, like which is like the Voice of America. And I feel like it's the easiest accent to do, which is kind of like a soft Californian kind of Midwesty kind of thing.
Midwest, yeah.
But like there is so much cross-pollination between accents increasing in America, and people don't seem to notice that much. And I wonder if they're a bit more flexible. They're used to hearing sort of slight variations in an accent, and it's not as important perhaps to really like nail the accent unless you're really distracting someone.
I honestly think that when it comes to being a voice actor working in the U.S., that it's far more important. Like the West Coast delivery is very different than East Coast delivery, the actual craft. And I think that is more important than trying to nail a specific West Coast versus East Coast accent. It's not so much the accent as it is the delivery.
Like the attitude.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
It's a different vibe that comes from a West Coast spot.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a brilliant series recently. I think it was Wired. Did Around America with the accent expert. Oh, his name escapes me now. I can't remember what it is, but I'll put a link down in here. But it's like he does 3 parts of American accents, and I didn't realize just how much variety there is, especially in the East Coast. It's just crazy.
Absolutely,
you get, like proper state accents, and it's just phenomenal.
You could go like in the New York, New Jersey area. You just cross the Hudson River, and someone from New Jersey sounds completely different than someone from New York.
Yeah, and the boroughs even, like the Bronx, etc. It's like
it's a very distinct accent.
Yeah. That's accents are one of those things that just fascinate me. In terms of that way, how differently people can speak. And do you offer accents other than Canadian and sort of standard American? Do you ever venture out?
I don't. I've never been a big character guy, and even the characters that I do offer tend not to be so much grounded in a different accent, or it's usually more just a different persona that I try to talk and work with.
Yeah, right. Interesting. Yeah, there is that interesting thing in voiceover. Like when I teach my sort of in-person Voice Academy course, we write down all of the different places you can find voiceover, and they fall distinctly or not distinctly, but there's a spectrum, of straight voiceover, quote unquote, and then the character over this end. And then you kind of realize that when people are reading a radio commercial, it's kind of a character. It's kind of the character of the voiceover guy, So but it's interesting that there is this, there is this really smooth sort of spectrum of between sort of, your traditional straight voiceover and then just to the zaniest of characters in cartoons and animations, etc. Yeah, it's fascinating. How important is range, do you think, to being a voiceover artist?
I think it depends. I in smaller places like Canada, like here in Toronto, having a wide range is very helpful because there's only so much work to go around, and being able to be potentially cast for any one of the 20 different jobs that may be circulating around town at any given time is helpful versus in Los Angeles or in New York. Like in New York, Joe Pesci can make an entire living just doing Joe Pesci. He doesn't have to. He doesn't have to do anything else other than, that one voice. I remember, if you remember, a voice actor named Lorenzo Music, who was based out of California. He was the voice of Garfield the cat, but he had that real kind of monotone, very droll delivery. That's all he did. That's all he did, and was able to make a great living at it. So I think it depends on the size of the market you're in.
And it's interesting. It's an interesting marketing sort of conundrum in terms of like, do you go broad and say, because sometimes because I do quite a few, I do different accents and different deliveries, and I've got lots of work showcasing all of it. But it's a bit confusing as in someone hiring a voice. If someone just says, I can do anything, you're kind of like, oh, okay. But if someone comes to you and says, I do the best Cockney accent in the world, you're like, oh, show it to me, I'll wait till I've got a Cockney accent. I'll write something for you that's got a Cockney accent, so it's, but, that does shoehorn you into kind of a corner. So it's a very interesting marketing decision to go those ways.
Yeah, I have found that somewhere in the middle has worked best for me, is that I tend to get those Mike Rowe sort of roles that, the narrating TV shows and things like that.
Construction and monster trucks.
Blowing things up and things like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Tends to be where I fit. And a lot of beer and pickup trucks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting how we sort of gravitate towards certain voices for certain things. And it's an interesting time in the voiceover industry because we're kind of being forced away from stereotypes. Like that you can't, there are no castings anymore that say, I want, a 40-year-old white male to do this. It's like every casting that comes through at the moment says open to all submissions from any ethnicities, any genders, everything. Like every single casting has that. And I wonder if that is genuine or if it's a kind of a disclaimer saying, oh, no, we're not being racist. We cast for everyone. When, I wonder how much of that is for show or how much genuine, anyone could actually do this role. Because I feel like when you see the ads produced, nothing much has changed. What are your thoughts on the way that it's changed now so that, there's lots of casting going on for which is meant to be indifferent to race and gender, etc. But sometimes kind of, I don't know, what do you think what's going on at the moment? Because it's kind of a confusing time.
Certainly, practically every audition that passes across my desk now has like BIPOC or something like that in it. Black, Indigenous, people of color. I think that there's a lot more sensitivity within the advertising community towards being more inclusive. I don't think that necessarily is excluding anybody either, though. But, you can see it very evidently when you look at, I was just remarking to my wife the other night as we were watching some TV, is that, practically every couple on TV now is either it's a gay couple or it's a biracial couple or, it's, they're going to extraordinary lengths to try and demonstrate their inclusivity. Yeah. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
No, not at all. No, I think it's definitely a good thing, isn't it? But my problem was being someone that does accents was, if I'm asked to do an accent for a minority, for example, and I do it really well, I'm just hypothetically, then, do I deserve to take that away from someone from that minority who might do it almost as well or something like that? When your job is to pretend to be other people, are you taking away the work from those other people? Like I know with the Simpsons voices, there was that thing with the Indian voices, and if you were doing ethnic voices, for example, is that morally justifiable these days? And so it's been an interesting debate.
Yeah, Hank Azaria from the Simpsons issued quite a profound apology just fairly recently in the past month or so, where he basically apologized for Apu and the fact that he has, extended the stereotype of the, Indian convenience store owner far longer than it deserved to be extended. And there's been a real debate within the voiceover community in the past couple of years about whether if the spec on a breakdown is asking for an African American male, is it okay for a white person, like a Caucasian person, to audition for that if they can do a authentic African American accent? Like there was a case a couple years ago of a white female voice actor based on the West Coast who did a real authentic African American dialect. And she really, when she was kind of exposed, because she actually had a whole different persona, she had a different website, the whole deal, you know, to kind of portray this, you know, African American woman.
Right.
And she was pilloried in the industry for, you know, maintaining this persona. So I think that there's been such a predominance for 50 years or more of every role going to, you know, white males, that now if there's an opportunity to cast an African American male to play an African American male, then we should probably go with the African American versus some white guy that can sound like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's a very interesting time, but I think we've come out on the right side in terms of, you know, everyone's accepting that, in the industry, which is good. So to completely change tack, because we're talking, there's so much good stuff going on, we're kind of not getting through the lots of questions that I want to get to. So very quickly, do you have an idea about vocal health and warm-ups, etc.? How much emphasis do you place on that? Not nearly as much as I should. That's basically my answer, exactly. I teach it, but I don't do it.
I think it's important, and I think that Peter Dixon's warm-up technique that is built into one of our Gravy for the Brain courses, and I can't remember right off which one it is dynamite. And Peter Dixon, who, you know, we all aspire to be Peter Dixon, does, you know, he religiously does a vocal warm-up before he does any sort of work that's of, you know, strenuous at all. So, you know, if we go by the people that are really at the top of the game, they do vocal warm-ups. I do some humming, and that's about it, unfortunately, before I start in the mornings.
Yeah.
I guess part of what I do tends to have, like, sometimes that morning voice I have, that gravel is even further accentuated, and that's not necessarily a bad thing depending on the particular audition or project I'm working on.
Totally, yeah. I mean, I definitely find that the first thing in the morning before warm-ups is kind of my best, some of my best tones. But the trouble is getting back there and having a live session at like 3 p.m. when you haven't got that voice. Like trying to match it is really tough.
You have to schedule it for, you know, 8 o'clock in the morning session.
Exactly.
Do you do a warm-up?
No. And the other day I actually paid the price for it because I did the network voice for a New Zealand radio network here, and it's really kind of intense voiceover. Like you really push your voice, like in everything. And this was like a half an hour session, but by 15 minutes, like I was hurting, and I was just like, I'm not sure I can make it through the session. Like I should have warmed up, but I did push through. But then it just hurt for like a day or two after. So I, backed off on auditions. So you do pay for not doing it. So for sessions where I'm really going to be using my voice, especially long form, anything over 5 minutes or something, I now will instigate even just reading interspersed with warm water just to kind of get everything going first. But especially those imaging sessions, they're really tough.
I think that a big part of it is also it's warming up, but it's also knowing how to use our instrument. Because I think there's probably a way that you can achieve that same sound that you're looking for that imaging project that isn't as hard on your voice.
That's
but
true,
you have training as a speech pathologist in order to know about the positioning of the sound in various spots in your throat and in your mouth. So
possibly even just turning up the gain on your mic and your headphone volume, because then you back off physically in terms of producing noise.
Well, and I certainly, I've been lucky enough to be like in studio with some of the best trailer guys in Los Angeles, Scott Rummel as an example, Scott Rummel, when he's doing a trailer, is barely speaking above a whisper. He is so quiet, and he's right up on his 416 or his 41.6, as the case may be.
Yeah.
And he's speaking barely above a whisper. And that's, I guess, how he can pull off that trailer voice, 8 hours a day, 5-6 days a week.
Yeah. I remember hearing a really interesting podcast, one of the VO Social, I think it was, and they talked to death metal band lead person singers who basically just get up there and scream for 90 minutes. Because I don't know about you, but if I have to do anything that involves raising my voice even slightly, like let alone screaming, my voice is shot for a long time. So how do they do it? And they have a special technique. They learn this special technique where they can make it sound like they're really screaming. But again, they're barely making any noise, and they've just got their hands cupped around the microphone to make it sound louder than it is. So it's very much the same for voiceover. Yeah. How interesting. What's your favorite genre? Like, I guess you have a favorite, perhaps, and then there's the one you work in most, or maybe they're the same.
The one I work in most is probably commercial. The one that I really enjoy doing is broadcast narration, like in-show narration. I've done, a number of different series for, North American networks like HGTV and, Discovery Channel, things like that. And I really enjoy doing in-show narration.
Yeah, absolutely. Documentary, I love doing.
The process of it is a lot of fun, where you're actually, you're there with the showrunner or the producer, the director, and you're actually working to picture, which is challenging. It's fun.
Another thing, I've had this request recently from a couple of auditions is when you need to be set up to do in picture, because of COVID now. You used to go to a studio and they'd have it all synced up with their Pro Tools in the studio and you'd punch in, etc. Now the onus we're kind of going into the tech space, which is good, but like I've definitely seen more demands come through from clients for me to be able to play back in session, edit, like keep like the good versions, like keep another session open of the good takes. So I feel like my skills as an audio engineer have been drawn upon much more, even replacing the audio engineer that they'd usually go to, and they're coming direct to voiceover artists who've got that idea. And I recently saw an audition where they said you need the ability to play back video and record to video at the same time, which is like quite a step up in terms of running your own home studio, isn't it?
It certainly is. And there's only, I think Source Connect has only just recently come up with a product that allows for, time code locked playback from one studio to another. I mean, literally, it's only been in the past 6 months, I think.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I remember right, where they've come up with that product. I mean, before then, I don't know if it was even possible, because latency would really screw, because the timing needs to be so exact, is that latency would really mess up your ability to, unless you were driving the picture, I guess, on your end.
Yeah, if you both had local copies of the picture somehow, and then it was just the time code that was locked when it played back to the audio. I have seen people where you have an external screen on your DAW, which is obviously showing the picture, and then you share that as a Zoom thing, but you need quite high bandwidth to show. Like I did one the other day where they put my voice with the picture and then played it back for everyone, and you would only get about every fifth frame or something. It was very choppy, and it was it didn't work perfectly. So I think we are on the cusp in terms of internet speed and the technology to do live picture from our home studios remotely, and it's kind of working for everyone. So that's exciting.
Well, now that we have gigabit internet and stuff, the bandwidth's there. I think it's just a matter for us to catch up from a technology standpoint, because I'm sure it's possible. And I haven't yet played with this new Source Connect product, but quite anxious to do so, because I would like to be able to sync time codes and be able to picture in my own studio.
Yeah, likewise, absolutely. So speaking of your own studio, mics, pre's, DAW gear, what are you using? What's your setup?
I have owned so many mics and so many preamps in my 12 years as a voice actor.
And there's been an explosion in the last few years.
Embarrassed to say. And I've actually ended up with a fairly simple setup, is that I have, I've had Manley preamps and DW Fern and all of these like esoteric tube
Super high end.
monstrous, preamps, and I had the Manley reference cardioid microphone for a while, and I had a U47 FET for a while, and I've really simplified. I have a U87 and I have a 416, but the 416 I rarely use. I just use it here as a Zoom mic.
Yeah.
And I have them going into a Universal Audio Apollo rack mount. And then I use the Manley VoxBox plugin. And that is where my sound comes from, generally.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had exactly the same journey in terms of I used to have this amazing multi-chain setup, and I had a U67, so like the valve version of the 87, which was an original vintage one. So I had that lovely vintage sound, and I used that for a number of years. And I had the problem of whenever I traveled, you just can't travel with that mic. Like, it's so delicate. If you drop it, there's $12,000 gone. It's ridiculous. And there's a power supply that you've got to lug around as well. It's just impractical. So I thought, well, let's try and get smaller mics. And I used to have a Neumann KMI 84, which is like a little pencil instrument mic. Lovely detailed, but very heavy on the pops and things. It's not designed for voiceover, really. So I was I was okay with that because it was easy to travel with. And then I got a 416 on eBay, a second-hand one that a sound recordist was selling off as part of his kit. It's like an old one. And I just started using that, and the noise was so low, and it was so kind of crisp and so robust. Like, you could literally just leave it out in the rain overnight probably, and it would still work the next day. Like, I haven't tried that. Don't anyone try that. But I've traveled with it all around the world, and you just wrap it in some bubble wrap and chuck it in your suitcase, and it's just been such a good workhorse. So like, I've been a fan of keeping it as simple as possible. So when you're traveling, you just have a mic, a lead, and an interface, and a laptop, and that's it. Everything else is in the box, so that if you need to do pickups on a project I did in my studio, you just make a pillow fort in your hotel room. Right. And then apply all the stuff that you usually apply, in terms of plugins, and then you've got exactly the same sound. Like, you don't have to go back and do too much work, which for the other mics was impossible. Like, to try and record on a different mic and make it balance.
Which is exactly why I, have kind of settled on using the Universal Audio family and that VoxBox plugin. And I don't travel with my U87. I use my 416 when I travel, but I'm able to tweak using the VoxBox and a couple of other plugins.
Yeah, I can emulate it
so that it sounds sort of ish U87.
Yeah, exactly. A bit of a
close enough.
Yeah, bit of a lift in bass and treble, etc. I recently got a Rode K2 valve mic because I wanted to get an U87. But there's been so much talk recently about, like, why does everyone need U87s? They are a great mic, but are they really that much better than everything else? So this was kind of an experiment, the K2. And I set it up for a little bit, and it was quite good. But again, it was the second-hand one. It had a little bit of noise, so I've got to solve that issue first. But I think it is. I think everyone who's at the sort of top level of voiceover has settled on the fact that you need like a 416 for cut-through, and then like a nice warm mic for narrative delivery. So you've got those two options. That seems to be where everyone's settling, which is quite heartening.
I think U87 is like the world's best microphone by any means, but it's such a standard
totally.
Engineers like it when you say you're talking into a U87 for two reasons. Number one is they know exactly how to EQ it and so on because they've worked with it so often. And the second thing is it just lets people know you're serious.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. It's like an entry criteria, isn't it? It's like, You're a proper voiceover then. Do you record in 44 or 48, 16 or 24? Or does that vary?
I record in 44, 1, 24.
Right, yeah.
I have no idea. No, I don't. I record in 48, 24.
Right, yeah, yeah, fair enough.
Just because most of the video clients want it in 48.
Exactly. Yeah. That's definitely my reason. And 24-bit, because of the Pro Audio Suite podcast, actually, they did a really good episode a while back about bit rates and why it's so important to have the more bits the better, because your dynamic range is massively different. You can get a real different sound. So that's why.
And then we just compress the crap out of it anyway.
Exactly.
Whatever dynamic range we had because we're recording in 24-bit, we just lost it all by compressing the crap out of it.
Exactly. Nothing below minus 60 dB. So you're pretty comfortable with your tech level of voiceover? Like you're very comfortable in your studio, and you've been a sort of technophile.
Yeah, I'm not a I'm not a tech guy like George Whittam is, where he knows all of the ins and outs of routing a 48 channel Neve board or something like that. But I certainly have had a lot of microphones and preamps and stuff go through my studio. So I know I know a little bit about a lot of equipment.
Yeah, exactly. It's a good way to be, isn't it? And your compression approach, because I've done a lot of sessions on compression recently. What is your approach to compression? Because people get that it can really alter your sound and ruin a good voiceover sometimes if it's not enough or too much.
It's funny is that just recently I had one of my agents call me and say, Graeme, your audio sounds off. What's going on? And I listened to it. It's like, you're absolutely right. Like I am like, it's easy to incrementally, add a little more here, a little more here. And let's add, one of the 1176 plugins just to give it a little bit of that sound. And then you end up with a processing chain like this deep in plugins. And I just stripped everything back to, I apply a little bit of compression on the way in using the VoxBox compressor, which is like the VoxBox emulation that Universal Audio has manufactured is lovely. Like Ivana Manley, I don't know how many stories you've ever heard about Ivana Manley, who's the president, the owner of Manley Labs. He's like crazy defensive about her stuff. And for her to license Universal Audio to produce a VoxBox, it sounds like a VoxBox. And so I use a little bit of compression on the way in using the VoxBox plugin. And I add just a touch of, I use a plugin called the Oxford Inflator, which is like a limiter sort of.
Right.
Which adds a little bit, just a touch more. And then my little bit of
tops.
A little bit.
Yeah.
And then a little bit of secret sauce is to, I add a little bit of the Aphex Oral Exciter.
Right.
Plug.
There's always the secret sauce, isn't it? It's one of those oral exciters. I used to have
a little touch of that.
I used to have the BBE Sonic Maximizer.
Yeah.
Do you remember those? They used to be in every radio studio, and no one knew what it did. There was just two knobs on it. There was one like energy and frequency or something, and you tweak them and you just settle on something. And again, like it would make your voice sound amazing. And there was all this blurb about it, harmonizing the frequency. It didn't make any sense, but it just I think it was just an EQ basically in a box. But who knows? But I got rid of that because again, I couldn't take that on tour with me, and I have a drastically different sound when I did pickups. So it's but it's so funny how you say you can go down these rabbit holes. It's about like when you go into Photoshop a picture, and you add a bit of contrast, add a bit of vibrance, add a bit of contrast, and it's suddenly you've got this like weird alien image that looks great to you because you've only seen that, so you need a reference to always go back to and be like, does it still sound like this good audio I've got over here? It can be quite dangerous going down those rabbit holes.
Absolutely. I clearly did, and thankfully my agent called me out on it. And
yeah, exactly. It's good to have those ears.
A far simpler processing chain.
Yeah. So speaking of agents, you have a number of agents, like sort of a lot of us in the continental states and North America.
Yeah, I have 3 in the U.S. and I have. It's important to have a local one here in Toronto. Just the Toronto marketplace is such that most of the good stuff comes through. Even the non-union stuff comes through one of 3 agents. So I'm represented by one of those 3 agents, Roger King at PN Agency. And then I have 3 different agents in the U.S.
Absolutely. It's an unusual market, that, in terms of you can have multiple agents within the US. It's odd that it's, 'cause I know in England and Australia and in New Zealand, the places I have agents, it's exclusive for the whole country. Whereas, America, it's kind of exclusive to the coast and then central almost. You can kind of get away with having, a couple of states between your agents. But you can you can definitely have a lot more than you could in other territories. But I guess that speaks of how big the industry is there and how widespread it is and how much work there is.
Yeah, absolutely. Although you still end up getting a lot of the same auditions from more than one agent.
You do. Yeah, you have to balance that well, don't you?
You
You
have to be
don't
careful
do all
about
three. And I get this question a lot from new, beginners who are starting, and they've done some Grade for the Rank courses, and they've maybe got their first few sort of pay-to-play gigs, or they see getting an agent as like, that's it, you're past the threshold and you've made it once you've got an agent, and they'll get you all your work and it'll be fantastic. But I mean, I tell them it's like, you need to have other options. Like an agent is a kind of a nice, but it's not crucial by any means.
About a third of my revenue comes through my agents.
Yeah.
But only a third, like 2/3 of it is stuff that either they're clients that I first discovered, or they first discovered me through an online casting site and then have reached out to me directly, or I still do work through online casting sites. But a third of it comes from my agents, and that's quite comfortable for me. I don't think I want a whole lot more coming through my agents.
Fair enough. So with online casting sites, what's your preferred ones at the moment? I mean, there's the big players. I feel like someone starts a new pay-to-play site every week at the moment. Like, there's just so many coming out, little ones, big ones even, like the Voiceovers.com experiment, which seemed so good in the start, and they really started with such a hiss and a roar, and that they were going to change everything, and then it just, for whatever reason, it just didn't happen. Which was disappointing for the industry, and I'm sure them as well. What do you see as the kind of like where do you think the pay-to-play industry is at the moment? What are your preferred ones, and where do you see it going into the future?
You're
Big
right.
question.
There's always, well, yeah, we could spend an entire hour now talking about this. There's always new ones coming on board. The new one is castvoices.com that we're all very hopeful for, because it's being run by Liz Atherton, who's a former agent, and a team that she's put together. And they promise to be very voiceover friendly. But, the lesson I learned in the time I spent at voiceovers.com is that, how you make a voiceover happy? You have lots of jobs for them.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to. And all of the other stuff that we as voice actors like to bitch and moan about the online casting sites, believe me, all of that goes away if they have lots of jobs for you to audition for.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to. And I have to tell you, my online casting site of choice right now is voices.com. And there's a certain irony in that, because 5 years ago, I was one of the leaders of the charge of, holding voices.com accountable for what at the time were some fairly shady business practices. But they've really cleaned that up. The transparency that we always wanted out of voices.com is now there. We may not love their business model because they extract fees at a bunch of different levels. And not every voice actor is very happy with that. But as far as I'm concerned, paying voices.com a 20% commission, or however they want to, whatever terms they want to couch it in, but it's basically a 20% commission. I pay my agent 20% commission, and I don't think twice about it. So I certainly find that online casting sites expose you to a lot of jobs that you would never otherwise have access to.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, I never sort of. I was very concerned when the voiceovers.com sort of expose happened with all the stuff that was going on. But I do feel like they have, like you say, they have made inroads into making it really transparent. And I mean, I have had some of my biggest paying jobs ever have come through voices.com, and they've been really high profile, big jobs, which I've been paid well for. And so, they've have made an interesting transition through that process in terms of cleaning their act up. So yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that as well. And I kind of hope that would happen, because that is always where the most jobs have been. I feel like Voice 123 is a very close second, but especially for the American market, Voices.com does seem to be there.
Yeah, and I think that, we all are hopeful that Cast Voices and Voice Realm and some of these other online casting sites are successful. But at the end of the day, the network effect matters. And 95% of the work is split between Voices.com and Voice123.com. The last 5% is split amongst 10 other little players. I love Armin Heistetter and Bodalgo. We all love Armin. He's a character. He loves voice actors, and it's clear he loves voice actors because his site is built to be very voice actor friendly. But at the end of the day, there's this many jobs versus this many jobs on, the other kind of two titans in the business.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, the future is perhaps just those two, the sort of duopoly continuing, I think, especially with the they've both been dancing around the whole TTS question and the text to speech, AI voices, etc. And coming up with interesting ideas. I know Voice 123 and Rolf had some very interesting ideas about offering a TTS service that was kind of with voice actors and kind of not. I haven't heard any results of the experiments he's been running, but that'd be a very interesting space to watch, I think.
Well, I think that we all have to acknowledge, as much as we are fearful of it, that text to speech and AI technology is very good and getting better quickly. And that some of the lower end stuff that a lot of us kind of make the majority of our money on, e-learning and things like that, is going. Some of that stuff is going to transition to text to speech, and there's going to be not a lot we're going to be able to do about that. So, having like what Rolf is undertaking at Voice 123 in trying to get ahead of that and allowing voice actors to offer synthesized voices as part of licensing synthesized voices to companies so that they can use them for e-learning or whatever is better that than just being completely shut out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there are so many sites that are, the speech-allo and stuff that say wow, it sounds just like a real human voice, and you hear it and you think, does it though? It's cheap, doesn't quite. You can still tell. It is getting closer though. I was looking at cleaning some bricks or something the other day, and I looked up an explainer video on YouTube, and we were listening to it, and I thought, I think that's an AI voice, because you can just tell. But it's getting so close now. It's like too consistent. If they put more flaws in, it would sound like a voiceover sort of thing, And
to be fair, is that when you're listening to a explainer video on cleaning bricks, how good does it need to be?
Exactly. Yeah. There's no emotion involved. It's literally just yeah. If it conveys the words, then the words are that. Whereas I think a gaming and character and advertising are going to be a lot further down the track, because if they can get if advertising directors are going in and spending 2 hours with a talent that's had 30 years of experience, and they still take 2 hours to get that. Imagine how much code they'd have to write to try and program an AI to do the same thing.
Yeah, certainly, because what advertising the directors are often looking for is flawed. They're looking for flaws in our performance as part of making it more human. It's going to be never say never, especially when it comes to computer technology. But it's going to be a long time, I think, before they're going to be able to build an AI voice that is going to be good enough to convey the emotion that we need to convey when we are reading advertising copy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very much agreed.
Let's hope so anyway.
Exactly. Fantastic. Well, we have gone over so much ground. We are nearly at the end, but if you've got 5 more minutes, I just want to cover some sort of, lots of people watch these videos because they are interested in, becoming a voice actor, starting the side hustle, as it may be.
Mhm.
Where do you advise, absolute beginners who say, my auntie says I've got a great voice, I should be a voiceover artist, which is the classic one, or, everyone tells me I've got a great voice. Where do you advise them to start if they want to start?
Well, Gravy for the Brain is a great start, because there's so much information available to Gravy for the Brain members that it's daunting. It's overwhelming. It's a great resource. The best piece of advice I could give to someone who is just getting into the business, and it's a piece of advice I had been given 12 years ago and didn't heed, and I wish I had. Spend half as much money on equipment and twice as much money on training.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Because
and acoustics, I'd say as well. I'd add to that.
Because it's easy to go down the, mic rabbit hole of, wanting to try every mic. And as I've always said, a great performance on an okay mic will beat an okay performance on a fantastic mic every time.
Absolutely. Yeah,
it's about our performance. And I don't think that the majority of our clients can tell the difference between a $200 MXL mic made in China and a Neumann U87.
Yeah,
I just don't think they can.
And also, to back that up as well with the acoustics argument, it's like, if you spend $3,000 on your mic and only, and nothing on your acoustics, you get a great recording of a terrible room.
Exactly.
As opposed to having a, okay recording as a dead room.
Yeah, it's, you hear stories of people setting up their $1,000 mics on their kitchen table, and you just cringe because you're never going to get a sound that's going to be acceptable to the majority of clients recording in your kitchen without proper acoustic treatment.
Exactly. Do you think it's harder or easier than it used to be to become a voiceover? Because I kind of chanced into it and being in a parallel industry, being an audio engineer in the kind of, recording studio, radio kind of world, and then I sort of transitioned sideways. There's so many more resources available to become a voiceover now, but there's so many more people who want to become voiceovers. It's kind of been popularized as a profession. So, what do you see? Do you think it's easier or harder these days?
I think it's relatively the same, because as technology has allowed for this explosion in the number of voice actors out there, because the barriers to entry have come down so far, now you can get a $200 Chinese-made microphone that's going to sound perfectly acceptable to 99% of the clients out there. But that same advancement in technology that is allowed for this, explosion in the number of actors has also caused an explosion in the amount of content that's being created that requires our efforts. There's not ABC, NBC, and CBS as 3 broadcast networks in the United States now. Now there's 600 cable channels. Yeah. All of them require, they're these massive, machines that just eat content 24/7. Something needs to be produced in order to fill all that time. Someone needs to voice all of those explainer videos and all of those corporate videos that are going on corporate websites. I mean, this stuff didn't exist 20 years ago. So I'm still very optimistic. I think that it's as good a time as it's ever been to seriously consider becoming a voice actor. I don't think it's easy. I think you need to work hard at it. I don't think you can just sit and wait for your phone to ring with your agent, giving you your living. It just doesn't work that way. You need to hustle.
Yeah.
But I think it's as good a time as it's ever been to become a voice actor.
What a brilliant answer and a brilliant place to finish our wonderful conversation today. Thank you so much, Graeme Spicer. And you can catch all of his great content on Gravy for the Brain, of course, the Canadian. Just search for the Canadian webinars and read-throughs in there. It's been fantastic to catch up. We've covered a lot of ground.
Thank you so much, Toby. I'm excited to be here, and I'm so glad that we had an opportunity to spend this hour together.
Fantastic. Thank you.